And welcome to the Recipients for 2025, where we feature the recipients of the National Awards for Disability Leadership. And I'm somewhat thrilled today to be talking to the fabulous Sarah Langston. Welcome, Sarah. Let me tell you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So good, so good. I'll tell you a bit about Sarah. Sarah is the recipient of the Rights Activism Award. Sarah is a powerful disability rights advocate. Well, you'd think that because she's just received the award. Anyway, who founded the Australian Neurodivergent Parents Association and also co-founded the Nobody Worse Off Coalition. Her leadership has defended the rights of neurodivergent people against NDIS cuts and discriminatory reforms. Well, bit of work to be done there. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'll tell
Yeah.
you briefly about the Rights Activism Award, which is for advancing the status of disabled people by using human rights mechanisms, including but not exclusively to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So rights activism is always a hotly contested award. There are so many people in our community out there doing all manner of things because there's all manner of things that need doing. And of course, not only has Sarah founded the Neurodivergent Parents Association, which has now been going for a couple of years, Sarah, yeah?
Yeah, 2023 we started. Yeah.
But now, of course, a lot of work being done around the NDIS and some changes there, and so the community eagerly awaits. The community is wondering what on earth's going on. So let's have a bit of a dig into Sarah and think about what Sarah's been doing and how she's worked on this, how she's achieved some outcomes, because the awards are for achieving outcomes or changing the status of disabled people for the better, of course, and not for the worse. So it's something where people have actually made achievements, and we're really, the judges are quite sort of serious about this stuff. They're very hard work, the judges.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So Sarah, how did you get into this sort of stuff? What drove you to doing this kind of work?
Lived experience. And I really believe that lived experience is always the most powerful driver of activism. It's when we experience things that we have the most, I guess, passion, and it's that kind of unkillable instinct to keep fighting and keep going until the problems are solved. So so that was how. So I'm a mum to a beautiful 9-year-old little man, and honestly, like I would say, our experiences of being a family in the early years are very typical of what neurodivergent families experience, unless they happen to have, unless they happen to come from a lot of privilege. So a lot of us are poor, and that is an intergenerational thing, which is something we talk a lot. We talk a lot about class and the intersection of neurodivergence and class, because that is definitely a connection. So I just had, and Rick with me, we just had the roughest start to being a family, and just all the things, ticked all the boxes. And that really culminated in 2018, where I ended up hospitalized just from really extreme dysregulation, because I didn't know that I was autistic, and I did not know that I had ADHD. And he also did, and I was single parenting, and everything just came to a head. And that was really kind of the, I guess, rock bottom for me. And I realized at that point, I need to do something or I'm going to die. And that will leave my son without me, and that can't happen. So I started searching around for answers and doing what I needed to do to, I guess, be more regulated and to have more capacity to parent him, and which I've done a pretty good job of. And and also going through accessing the NDIS for him, going through diagnosis for him, all of these things. And we then, like a lot of families, got very quickly funneled into the child protection system. And the lived experience of that just changed me completely. It opened my eyes to what systemic discrimination is for disabled parents. And this is honestly, it's one of the, even though it is discussed, I still feel in terms of having lived experience perspectives in the mix, it is still one of the least touched areas of advocacy. There's lots of reasons for that. There are legal reasons that tied up in the children's court. There's lots of stuff. But and I remember when we had DCJ coming and doing visits, and I just remember being so aggrieved at the fact that essentially the notification was based on my presentation. The fact that I would send long emails to the preschool, and I advocated for him really hard when he was being excluded from his from excursions. So all of this kind of rolled into me being seen as many autistic mothers are seen, as aggressive, as not that I ever really was. I was just actually assertive. And as odd. And because of unconscious bias, and then that pack effect that happens a lot in groups where autistic women are often ostracized, very quickly that turned into a notification. And then we had DCJ involved with our family for about 7 months of home visits. And I just remember, honestly, and I do sometimes tell this story in the course of advocacy work because, you know, everyone always wants to know the origin story, right? Like, they're like, why did you quit? And I remember, like, really the turning point was when, after the first home visit, I was like I'd put Rip to bed and I was laying face down on the floor of my bathroom, crying my eyes out, so terrified he would be removed from my care, feeling so upset that how I talk and how I present in the world could be the cause of it. Like, it was bizarre to me. I was like, that's so, I'm a good mum, he's safe. Like, I don't get it. And thinking to myself, you know what, if we get out of this and he's still with me and we're okay, I won't let this happen for another family. I'll do something about this. And that night where I had that thought was like a really crystal moment in my memory, and it started from there. So the idea of AMPA was born because I remember talking to people being like, isn't there an organization or something that represents us? Isn't there? And I looked around and I couldn't see anything. So I just made it with my friends. And that's why AMPA happened.
Yes. And it's, you know, what I'm hearing from you there, Sarah, is so many of those systemic issues that we've learned as disabled women over decades, you know, is we're not supposed to have relationships, you know, we're not expected to have sex, we're certainly not expected to be parents, and there's still this incredibly high exposure to the child protection system,
huge.
for not just for disabled children, but for disabled parents. And it's completely undiscussed, which is probably not a word, but it's really not discussed out there in the wider world. And you know, I used to run an advocacy organisation, and it was certainly one of our major areas of work was the child protection system and the numbers of disabled parents being basically responded to by child protection because the disability support system didn't have any other way of responding to them. And then we get to a whole bunch of gendered stuff around women not accessing supports to the same extent as men, getting a bit binary on the genders there, but all of that stuff. And, you know, all of the presumptions that go with it. So you've formed ANPA, the Neurodivergent Parents Association. You've been doing all of this stuff for a couple of years. What's going down right now? What's the big stuff that's happening right now on the work front?
Look, it's, wow, what a year.
Yes.
I feel like when anyone in the advocacy activism space right now describes the last 12 to 18 months, we all just kind of end up going, because it's been so awful.
Yes.
Yeah, like our big focus has been the NDIS because the NDIS is the key scaffolding around our families where you have, as is actually the most common family constellation, you often have one or both parents who are neurodivergent and children who are neurodivergent. We know now it's really genetic, like pretty much all forms of neurodivergence. And so the NDIS is critically important for our community because, and it like prior to the cuts, it was woefully inadequate, right? So we've gone from woefully inadequate to, I don't even have words to describe, like violent, hostile, erasing us. And everything has come with it. So it's all of the national discourse, the rhetoric around who our children are, who we are. It's been the construction of us in the public consciousness as rorters and as essentially soaks for government money without cause, that we don't need or deserve this, that we, and that this is a very dominant view, and it has been carefully constructed. It's been politically constructed. It has not just happened, and it has no basis in reality. So what we've been working on really is we're desperately advocating to keep individualized supports in place for children and parents on the who obviously need it. There are neurodivergent families where parents have had certain privileges in life. They've had really good scaffolding, not a lot of trauma, and or they have really good school for their kids, and they haven't experienced a lot of exclusion, and they are okay. I wouldn't say that's the majority. So we've been working on trying to keep that around families because this is a really key thing, and a part of why I'm so passionate about the NDIS is that those supports and that scaffolding around families is often the difference between a child being removed or a child remaining with their family of origin. Because the way that the intersection between federal disability supports, there is an ant in my shoe, give me one moment. It's gone. So, there is this nexus where we find the way that the NDIS and child protection connect, and that is that if a child is disabled or a parent is disabled, child protection will always first look at what support is around the family. And that is how they primarily triage safety and risk. So if a family has lots of supports around the child or the parent, depending on what the cause of the notification is, it's sort of like it's like the angel of death passing over, like that they will often say, well, look, we can see this family's supported. So that has reduced our concerns because we can see there's psych, there's OT, mum is connected to a social worker on the NDIS, whatever it is, the support worker in home, there are eyes on this family, they're visible in the community. Then that risk assessment reduces and they kind of move on because family is supported. Now, when we remove the scaffolding, which the federal government has done in tens of thousands of families, we start to get problems. And we know from our membership and from our very strong, deep connections in the ND community that there are more referrals. The cases are going up, and we're seeing a surge in families referred on to child protection because of that intersection.
Oh, it's happening. Yeah, it's
horrific. It's awful. Like there are no words.
It's hideous. I'm interested in, something that's also not often discussed is the way, particularly again as disabled women, or female presenting people, how we're often not taken seriously. We're not really believed. There's still a lot of infantilizing that goes on. And I'm interested in the sorts of roadblocks, the sorts of experiences you've encountered over the last couple of years,
yes,
in the bigger picture, the systemic picture, you formed this organisation, ANPA, and how the road for that organisation, how it travelled to a point where it was actually taken seriously. And most recently, of course, you presented to a Senate committee to provide evidence. You don't do that if you're just some fly-by-night kind of discredited bunch of fringe dwellers. So how did you achieve that level of credibility for the organisation? Or was there a problem getting there? Was there any sort of doubt about it?
Yeah, there was. So something that's interesting to note, and I haven't checked in the last couple of days, so maybe it is up now. But with the Thriving Kids inquiry, obviously, I'll just be blunt and say the neurodivergent community don't want it. We reject it. We don't want this reform. We want our children to retain individualized supports because that's their right under international law. And so with getting before that inquiry, so with the Joint Standing Committee, there was no issue. We were invited like straight up in kind of one of the first rounds, and our submission went up, and that was all fine. And that was a really good experience. Now, it was a very different story with the Thriving Kids inquiry because ours and about 74 other submissions as of mid last week just were not listed on the Parliament website, which is interesting. And we repeatedly contacted the committee saying, why are not all of the submissions going up so that they can be looked at by the public? And the response was, that's the decision of the chair and the committee. They might not list everything. And I was like, that's not very democratic, but okay. And then in terms of getting before the committee, so we initially weren't invited, and RAIN were. So RAIN is the Regional Autistic Engagement Network, who are a kind of newly emerged network. Amazing bunch of activists. They actually just held incredible protests in Hobart on the weekend, which, along with the Tassie Disabled Pride network. So they were invited, and they said to us, because we work with them on a lot of things, they were like, were you guys invited to, you're such a key, like, so relevant to this issue, we want you there. And we were like, no, we haven't been invited, and we were under the impression it was one of the last hearings. So they fought for us to have a seat at the table. So RAIN actually went to the Secretariat and said, no, we want them there with us. And I think ASAN also did. So I think that's like a really good example of the way that we work and a lot of people in the grassroots work, which is to lift each other up and take each other with us. And if someone wants to give one of us a seat, but not our peers, we're like, that's not okay. You need to bring us all. So yeah, we went to the inquiry, and I know a lot of people watched that and were really appalled with how it went down. It was pretty shocking how the autistic women who presented there on that day were treated. I know that in the last 2 days, the women from ASAN have actually filed a DDA complaint now about that, which I commend them for and which we endorse. So the biggest block really is that, especially with neurodivergence, there is so much unconscious bias, and that concept of epistemic injustice comes here, which is that idea that bias in the mind of the listener can render your evidence, your testimony, your voice less credible and less important than a non-disabled person, a non-disabled woman. And we see this across gender, we see this across disability and lots of different kind of marginalised identities. But this is what I encounter over and over, and I know this is an experience that's shared by the women at RAIN and also at ASAN, is that when we were there and we were speaking, it was so evident that our presence was not desired, our input was not valued, and we were seen as a risk and as, I don't know, as not really trustworthy. And I think the clearest example, and this is, I'm so glad that we have this on hindsight, we actually went and compared, so concrete, which is really good. We actually went and compared the preamble, like the introduction they give at the start before everything gets going, the preamble that was given by the chair to our session, to all the other sessions, and it was completely different. So the wording of ours was basically, we were reminded to be respectful. We were reminded not to attack any, like we would do that, not to get personal. Like it was so loaded, and it was full of all of this kind of policing of behavior. And so this is what we see. This is how neurodivergent women, autistic women in this case, are received often by systems. That epistemic injustice is right there. You're in the crosshairs of it. And it's frustrating for us because we see it, we know what it is because we work in this. We have language, we have words for it. I don't even know if they realize they're doing it. I'm not sure, but we put in a complaint to the Secretariat and also to the Speaker, highlighting what had happened and putting the preambles side by side and saying, right here, it is, you can see it. So that's a good thing in a sense, in that it makes it so crystal clear how present that discrimination is, even in a parliamentary inquiry where everyone should be treated with the same, respect and with equity.
Such a stark reminder of we know in the disability community and the movement that we've come a fair way. I mean, we're not all slung in institutions like we used to be, even though plenty of people still are. But these stark reminders that we're still, at the barricades, we're literally talking about rights activism at the front line here. And the fact that we are still not treated equally or with respect, our voices are still seen as remarkably inconvenient. We're expected to say something that they know they're going to hate. It's really, what difference?
What we do say things they don't want to hear as well. We do say things that they do hate, but there are things that need to be said. There are things that desperately need to be said, and I think that some people have a response to that, to these repeat experiences of discrimination. Some people's response to that is to make themselves smaller and to mask heavily or to change how they operate so that they can get in, so they can get a foot in the door and get proximity to power, to make themselves more acceptable. I guess the reason that we don't operate that way, and our when we have those experiences, our response as an organisation is essentially is because we understand that that's part of the fight there, and masking has a sometimes life-ending cost for autistic women. It's so harmful, and so I will never. Anyone that is ever on the board of AMPA, I will never encourage them or ask them to mask to participate in activism through our org, because I know what it does to people, and it's a WHS risk. So it's really important that when that happens, rather than feel chastised and change how we do things, that we actually use it as a vehicle to highlight that discrimination and how it cuts certain voices out and makes them less credible, and how that distorts outcomes. Because we're talking about the limiting of individualized support services that can be the difference between someone maintaining care of their child and also life and death. Like, the suicide rates for our community are sky high. So it's really important. It's really important that we actually don't it's that thing of the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So I know for some people it seems like we are harping on things. We're actually not. We're actually saying, no, that's not the standard. We don't accept that for our community or for anyone who's there working and being treated like that. It's unacceptable.
Well, disability, I mean, it's who we are, it's how we turn up. It's the thing. It's just
That's right.
us, it's that.
Yep.
I mean, how do you think receiving this award might make a difference to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that in the last few days. Um, I think it's such an interesting one. In that I hope it, well, I mean, I think the work will just continue on as it has. Like,
Mm.
I think, I think I actually think a good thing about it is that it's a bit of an indicator to some of the voices inside, I guess, government or some of the more, trying to think of it, some of the more like tamer advocacy spaces where I know we're disapproved of. We fully are, and like I hear everything comes back, and I do hear it. I would hope it's a bit of an indication that the community does endorse the things we're talking about and that they're concerned about it too. And that we're not actually seen by the community like the disability community at large. We're not actually seen as extremists and radicals. We're actually just saying things in a really blunt way that they think and feel too. Because there are a lot of people who are not in a position to advocate the way that we do. They just can't, and I understand that. But that's why we go even harder, because it means that we can speak for them and we can say the things that they wish they could say, but are just not in a position to. So I would hope that would be an effect, that it might make a few people who need to be nervous a bit more nervous.
Absolutely. And movements are inherently an awful lot of people right across the spectrum. The people who are at the front line saying things in a very blunt way that need to be said, and other people who work inside systems and use those methods. And you've got to have pretty much all of it, otherwise the change doesn't turn up. And
as long as they're pointing in the right direction altogether, which is dignity, safety, equity, the realization of the UNCRPD, and I know that we all are. So yeah, that's really what matters to me. Yeah.
That's the one. It's the big rights outcome, the status of disabled people, isn't it? And so what's in store for 2026? What's the year going to look like for you?
I think that our big focus at the moment is fighting support needs assessments. And everything that we've seen emerge from the Guardian article this week is stuff that was known to the community, and it's more on the public radar, which is fantastic. And I'm so thankful to Kate Lyons from The Guardian for her coverage. She did a brilliant job. And also to all the people working hard behind the scenes with The Guardian on that coverage. So thank you to all of them. So I think that a big part of our year is going to be really focused on that, really focused on fighting those assessments and the whole framework that comes with it. Really looking forward to the Every Australian Counts meeting this week. We'll be collaborating and throwing in basically with everyone else who's working on that, so that we can share resources and really pitch in. I think our contribution will be what we're good at, which is digital. We are the digital ninjas. That's our space where we're comfortable. But also, I think doing a lot more cross-solidarity work, where we're sort of stepping outside of the disability community and looking for allies. So we're doing a lot of work with unions, really working hard to speak to civil societies, talking to law societies, basically trying to bring more allies to this cause of trying to keep the NDIS protected and safe and restored, and stopping SNAs, because they are just disastrous. And I mean, it's I think one of the things that we're connecting with civil societies and like legal societies around is that the big concern that we have around the concentration of power in the executive, which we present, and how they function. So looking at review rights, looking at those really essential human rights, and then trying to bring others attention to it. So we do that. And then all we've got a GEM community, we've got a lot of people who want to join the board, so going through board applications, and there's really good energy for a new board in 2026. So we'll be doing some training. We're looking at doing training through Justice Connect, really trying to build up and invest in our board, in governance skills. We want people, if they serve a year on our board, to leave feeling invested in. So we don't have much money. So fundraising is going to be a thing too. But the little bit that we have, and I mean it's small, will be invested back into good governance and ensuring that we run in a way that is really democratic, really, I guess, yeah, that just jives with all the principles that we believe in, which is, democracy, accountability, transparency. These are big values in AMPA. We may sound like bullshit radicals, but actually, when it comes down to it, at heart, we're boring little nerds. Like, I'm studying law and applying those principles.
Yes.
Good governance. It's so important. Like, it's the heart. You can't do that louder work unless you're built on a solid foundation.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
So we'll be doing that.
Absolutely. It's being very conscious. We've got a bit of an interesting reception issue going on with our internet here, Sarah, but there's a
sorry.
No, it's the weather is strange at the moment. And I'll, heads up for those listening, and, we're recording this in early December when the weather is very wild and there's fires and wind and all sorts of things happening.
Yeah.
The final question I always like to ask people, just to check in, is who is a leader that you admire and why?
This is such a good question. I feel like there's just so many, actually.
Yeah.
A leader I admire. You know what? I'm going to be a bit sentimental for a minute and say my Auntie Mandy.
Lovely.
So my auntie Mandy, I know it's probably going to make her cry when she sees it. My Auntie Mandy, she, when I was little, she was the first feminist that I knew of, right? And I just remember as a small one, she was like the young cool auntie, and I just remember being in awe of her as a child. And she worked in the public service, and she did a lot of stuff. She worked on different political campaigns and stuff, and she was just her own woman. And I really saw that, and it really influenced me and shaped me. And I just remember at family gatherings, she would often push back when people said things that were just crappy. And I remember being like 16, and we would go on family holidays all together, and we would have like, a fancy salad sitting on the balcony of her accommodation. And it just feeling really great to be nurtured and seen as a political being and as a young woman. And then she's gone on to be one of my, greatest champions. She's helped me move house several times. She's someone I text, regularly and ask for advice on work. And she's a very kind of quiet person, but she's very determined, and she really lives the principles of care, as well as being very reflective, and just full of love. Like she really loves her family and she loves her community, and yeah, and she's wise. Like she's often the person who'll be like, I don't know if you should do that. So yeah, I would say her. I mean, there's so many more like people that I could say, like Lydia Shelley from New South Wales Council is also a mentor. I just admire her so much. And my best friend Beck, who passed in 2023, was a huge and continues to be a huge influence on me, even though she's now passed unionist. But I'm lucky. I have so many amazing women who have been in my life in various capacities. But yeah, my Auntie Mandy is a long enduring hero of mine. She probably doesn't know that, but she is.
Lovely reminder that we are formed by many folk. It's not an individual sport. Being a human is about being connected. It's lovely. Langston, thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. A massive congratulations once again on being the recipient of the 2025 Rights Activism Award in the National Awards for Disability Leadership.
Thank you. And I'm just thank you so much, because it's really lovely. And I really, I think it's just meaningful that my peers nominated me. That made a big dent on my heart in a positive way. So yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me.
Oh, fantastic. Absolutely.